Today is Tuesday, March 4th, 2025. My name is John Escudeno. I'm interviewing Gilbert Martinez in Austin, Texas for the Voces Oral History Center. We are at the University of Texas at Austin campus. Thank you, Mr. Martinez, for agreeing to this interview. Before we begin, the raw, unedited recording of this interview will be archived at the Nettie Lee Benson Latin America Collection on the UT campus, where it will be available for anyone who wishes to access it. If there's anything you don't want to talk about, we completely understand and respect your wishes. If there's something you specifically want to discuss, please feel free to bring it up so that we may discuss it. Please also let us know if you need to pause the interview or take a break. Today we'll be going over your life experiences. This will include your childhood, working, the UT Tower shooting, and your career with the Chamber of Commerce. If you're ready, we can jump right in, starting with your childhood. I know it's a bit of a vague question, but can you tell me what your childhood was like?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
Oh, what was your childhood like?
Oh, very pleasant with a large extended family. All my cousins. I had my father was of a family of 12 children with my grandparents, and they were very successful farmers and dairymen in Northwest Texas. So I had a very pleasant childhood.
Mm-hmm. And where specifically were you from in Northwest Texas?
It's a very small town named Rotan, which is between Abilene and Lubbock.
And what were your parents like?
Oh, they were loving, very understanding. My mother was a little bit more demanding. I just adore my father. My father never whipped me. Never. My mother's spanked me about 3 times, and 2 of those times I had not done anything wrong. And so I'll always remember that, but I just adore my father.
And what languages did you speak in your household?
Spanish.
Did your parents speak any others, or was it also just Spanish?
Also Spanish and English.
What was your area and neighborhood like?
Well, we lived out in the country, and it was usually it was a very dry type of environment in Northwest Texas. Did not rain very much, did not have very much vegetation. We did not have grass around the house. We had maybe a few shrubs and small mesquites. And so I wish that I always wanted to live as an adult. I always wanted to live in a house surrounded by grass and flowers and trees. So that's why I ended up in Austin.
Do you have any idea what your parents' upbringing was like? How your parents were raised?
Well, they were raised by their families, and their parents never divorced. It was a very solid family life. They were good Catholics and good farmers and respected in the community. And so to me, it was a happy life.
And then as a kid, what was your experience with education like?
Well, we had to work a lot on the farm. And sometimes during cotton picking time, if we did not have enough cotton pickers, we had to work more. And during the Second World War, my granddad had a good bit of land, and 5 of my younger uncles farmed it, and they were all drafted, 5 of them. So my father and I farmed my grandfather's land with 2 tractors in 43 and 44 and 45 until my uncle started coming back from the military. And so that was a lot of work to maintain that, to farm that many acres with 2 tractors. My daddy on one, I on the other, and I worked from sunup to sundown during the summer. And so then, but we went to school during the school year and missed a little time from school to pick cotton or to work on the farm or the dairy. The dairy was handled by other uncles, and so we didn't have that much to do with the dairy, but we did with the raising of cotton, raising of sorghum, and raising of wheat, and my granddad came there, when there was mostly ranch land, no farmland.
How young were you when you started working on the farm?
About 10.
Did you mainly, I know you mentioned the different types of crops, but did you mainly work with, I know you mentioned the cotton, but did you mainly more work with the dairy or with the crops?
With the crops. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The dairy, they didn't start the dairy until 47 when five of my uncles came from the Army, and they four of my uncles went to Indiana and came back with 124 Holstein cattle. Up in those days, most of the cattle that we had were Jerseys and Guernseys that have a lot of butterfat content. And so the Holsteins have very small butterfat content. They give a lot of milk. And so that one was, but a few years after that, we had the cholesterol that you had to worry about. And then you didn't want to drink whole milk. You wanted, and then plain milk became more valuable than heavy milk with a lot of cream. And so.
And did you ever, I apologize if I'm harping on the same thing, but did you ever work with the dairy cows very much?
Oh, yes. No? Oh, yes. And in high school, I was in FFA, and so I was one of the best judges of dairy cattle when I was in high school.
And for those unaware, what is the FFA?
Future Farmers of America.
Mm-hmm. And then, so when it came to school or wherever else, did you ever have any experiences where you felt like an outsider?
Well, in what respect?
In the sense that you worked on a farm a lot of your life, and like you said, you missed a lot of school. Maybe there were a lot of kids who didn't have that experience. So were there any ever situations or times where you felt different than the other students?
Well, it's kind of a complicated question because in high school, the Martinezes were almost the only ones attending school. Most of Mexican Americans attended the earlier grades, and so a lot of my friends were mostly Anglos, and most of them were Protestant. And so that there's a difference there that is noticeable to me, because I was in the minority. Also, as a Catholic, I was a minority. As a Hispanic, I was as a minority, and so that was different, but not to a degree that say influenced my life in a negative way. Because I really was not mistreated. I was invited in to have dinner with my Anglo friends, and so, yeah, I could tell, there's a difference, but I had such a background that wasn't an overwhelming issue.
Speaking of your background, do you remember, do you have a lot of memories of your grandparents?
Yes.
What were they like?
They were really fine. I loved working with my grandfather, and he liked to joke. And so sometimes, let's think he was doing, and he'd do something that wasn't pleasing. He wasn't doing it right, and he would say, "Oh, mijo, ¿a que su abuelo tan pendejo?" No, abuelito, usted no es pendejo, usted no es pendejo. What a foolish grandfather you have. No, you're not foolish, grandfather. I love him. I think he did that on purpose. My grandmother was very, let me see if I can find the right word for it, very proper, okay? When we went to church on Sunday and we were all dressed nice, and I remember she had a walking cane, and if you were standing like a lot of children stand with one foot on top of the other, she would tap your foot, you stand on both feet, you take your hands out of your pocket, and you stand straight, and she would correct us on the things that we said, on words that we said. So my grandmother was very proper.
And do you know why they might have moved to North Texas or Northwest Texas?
Well, if I may, why don't I start with telling you when my family first came to West Texas?
Please
Would
do.
that work? All right. My great grandfather was born in El Paso in 1834, and then my granddad left El Paso in 1900 with his wife and 2 children, and he moved to Abilene and he started working for the railroad, and so he became the maintenance foreman for the crew that the railroad had between Abilene and Big Spring. That's where he worked. He worked there for a few years there, and in 1900, and that's where my dad was born in Abilene. My uncle Fred, the second child, was born there in 1902. My dad was born in 1904, and at the end of 1904, he left the railroad and started working for a small area west of Abilene. It was named Sylvester, that they were clearing ranch land to make farmland. So he started clearing land, and they called it grubbing land. That's the word that they use, grubbing land, or clearing land to make it into farmland. That's what my granddad did. And he had a very loyal young man that worked with him that had been what is it when you don't have a father and a mother?
Orphan?
Orphan, and so he became very attached to my grandfather. He was very hardworking. His name was Nicolas Diaz. And so they both worked together, and my oldest uncle, Jose, who was 10 years old, also worked with them, trimming the limbs that they chopped out. They dig around the mesquite and then chop the roots and pull it out and stack it, and that's the way they cleared the land. So after he did that for a while, and then he started contracting. He hired other Mexicans, Mexican Americans, to work with him, and he contracted the jobs, and he made good money for about 2 years. This was in Sylvester, Texas, that they were clearing land. And so then the railroad, they were starting to build a railroad between Stamford and a white spot in the road called White Flats, because they had a lot of gypsum and the ground was white. So the gentleman that brought the railroad to that part of the country, to White Flats, was named Mr. Roten. He was with a finance company, that out of Houston, Mr. Roten. So when they brought the railroad to Roten, to White Flats, they changed the name to Roten. That's where we ended up in 1907. My grandfather with his family ended up in 1907. In the meantime, going back to Sylvester, after my father was born, his oldest son, Jose, was 10 years old, died. But they had been expecting that. They'd been told that he might die at a young age. And what we realized years later, it was a blue baby. He was a blue baby. And they normally didn't live past 10 and a half, 11 years. So he died, and he's buried there in Roby, Texas. How difficult it must have been, because they lived in a tent. There were no houses. They lived in the tent. And so then my granddaddy went with the railroad, back with the railroad when they built it, the railroad to Roten. That's how he ended up in West Texas in Roten. A question you asked. That's how the family ended up there. He came with the railroad. And so then he had this little stash of money, and he had a good friend from Abilene named Lon Perkins. They both went north of Roten, where there was hardly, it was mostly all ranch land, and they started clearing land to make it into farmland. And that's how he ended up with this big ranch in northwest Texas. And he cleared the land on the section of land and built a house. And first built a dugout. You know what a dugout is? On the side of a hill, you dig a hole, and then you bring some boards from town and you put a roof on it. They lived, the first year, they lived in a half dugout. All right, after that, they built a house. When they started raising crops, they built a house. And the ranch owner was named Sid Johnson, who was very, a man that liked to live high and he carried grudges. And it's just like the West. And I'm telling you this to give you a flavor of what life was like in those days in 1907, 1908, 1910. Okay, and there were no schools at that time. But getting away from Sid Johnson, he instigated a man being jailed. They framed him, and he went to prison. And that Sid Johnson was in that book. And there's a book, you can still get that book. It's called The Bloody Legacy of Pink Higgins. The Bloody Legacy of Pink Higgins. Fascinating thing is that book is as interesting as any Western you want to see on TV. And the interesting thing to me is the things that my dad told me about Sid Johnson, it's in that book, what he did to other people and so forth. And he killed his own brother-in-law. And so Maggie Willingham was his wife. She was from a proper family. And she kicked him out, divorced him. And when he left, Maggie said, Fred, we owe you some money. You know, I have a lot of cattle, I have a lot of land, but I don't have the cash to pay you. So if you take that section where you cleared the land, built your house, if you pay the back taxes on it, I'll deed it to you. And that's what happened. That's how he ended up with the land. And I had, years later, I got the deed from the county courthouse, and where he had a line that said the amount of cash, it said, and other considerations. So very interesting how he ended up owning a section of land. That's the first section that he owned. And what I started to tell you about his children, his first 5 children, is that there was no school for nobody, not even Anglos. So my granddaddy subscribed to La Prensa out of San Antonio, and he had La Prensa sent to his mailbox there in Rotan. He read it, and he put an ad in La Prensa for a tutor to come over there to teach his children. So he hired a lady from San Antonio. She went on the train to Rotan, and he picked her up in the buggy, and she lived with him for maybe like a couple of years, teaching his 5 children, because there was no school even for Anglos in that part of the country. So then they built a school by then a lot more people had arrived in a couple of years, and they built a school at, I forgot the name for a moment. But anyway, they built a school, and so then the 5 children went to school in a buggy, about 2.5 miles. And I remember my dad telling me that he was in charge of having a gunny sack with a few heads of sorghum in the sack to feed the horse, sometime during the day, I guess maybe around noon. That's how they went to school. When the school opened, then the tutor went back to San Antonio. But it's amazing, people that I tell this story, that they wonder about how my grandfather thought to get a tutor to teach his children so his children could be educated. When now a lot of people even have handy schools in the next block and they don't even finish, they drop out. And so my granddaddy, that's how important education was to him, that he hired a tutor for him. And then a couple of years later, he was instrumental in building another school that was even closer, that was right on the highway across from a little grocery store, the highway that comes from Route 10 that goes to Jayton. And this is where the younger children went to school in it was called Harmony. And that's where I went to school in the first grade in 1938, in Harmony. That tells you the story of, the family ending up in West Texas, all right? And then during the Second World War, I told you that 5 of my uncles were drafted, and so they went. And when they came back, they all started buying land closer to town, west of Route 10, because they wanted to have a dairy, but they had no electricity and no running water in Kent County, where they first started. Over in Route 10, they had water and they had electricity. Electricity came, I remember, 1944 and 45. That's when they brought the REA, that the government was instrumental in bringing electricity to that part of the country. And so then they started the large dairy. And by that time, they had the Martinez family had 3 sections of land, and they all worked together. All of my uncles stayed with my granddad. They worked together because that way they could buy tractors, they could buy combines, so they could buy expensive farm equipment by all working together. That's what they did. So.
You mentioned the dairy farm again, and I just want to get the facts straight. Do you know how many cows? You mentioned about 124 they brought back.
They started with that, 124 Holsteins.
Mm-hmm. And do you know how many they had by,
No, I don't know how many they had, but what I do know is that in the closest large town was Lubbock, and Lubbock had Foremost Dairies, and Foremost Dairy sent daily a tank truck to pick up the milk from the Martinez brothers' dairy. So they had the dairy had a stainless steel 1,500-gallon tank that they put in. There's like 3 milkings, so that the truck didn't come right away, because the cows don't wait. You have to milk them, and so the milk was sold to I think it's Foremost out of Lubbock. So, but it was something that, well, first of all, there weren't any Hispanics that owned the dairy. And second, there was no other dairies in the area anyway. So they were very successful. The Martinez family was very successful with that, because when the drought came in 51 through 57, the dairy kept them, on the farms.
Now, you mentioned when your uncles went to war. Did you ever talk to them during,
Yes.
Through letters and stuff?
Yes, it was very interesting. And right in 42, the first one to come back was my Uncle Ben, who had been the first one that had gone in, and right after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and he fought in New Guinea, and then the army sent him back to train people in jungle combat, I guess. He was the first one to come back, my Uncle Ben, and he only got the Bronze Star. Emilio was in the Philippines sometime after that, and he got the Silver Star for what he did. And it might be too long for me to tell you the story how he did that, but it's very interesting. But all of us young Martinez kids were real interested in hearing all these heroic things from our uncles. It's very interesting. So.
And how did it feel seeing or knowing that your uncles had gone off to war?
Well, I don't know. We read comic books in those days, and went to the Saturday movies and saw the westerns and the cartoons and all of that. And so it was just something that in those days everybody did. So now, when you ask me about the differences, that I'd like to deal with that next, because we being Hispanics and being in that town, the main crop was cotton. And in months of usually September, October, November, there were people that came from all over South Texas to pick cotton. And they were not served in the restaurants. Their hair was not cut in the barbershops or the beauty shops, or they could go to grocery stores and buy food, and they could go to the pharmacies and buy medicine and all that, but they weren't served like that. So what the Martinez brothers did, my uncles, they went around meeting what we call troqueros, the fellow that had a truck and had his family with him, or family relations or neighbors that would bring those people up to pick cotton. They got acquainted with every one of them. I mean, as many as they could, got their name and their addresses, so that they could send them a letter and notify them and organize this thing, a boycott. That's what the Martinez brothers did. And it was all led by my Uncle Bob. My Uncle Robert was just a very smart man, very good man. And so when they got all those addresses, this was in 42. So in 43, they sent the letters out notifying them that things had not improved. And my mother could type, and so they got some business envelopes. They typed the return address, Martinez Brothers, P.O. Box 105, Roten, Texas. And then she typed a letter, very brief letter, saying that things have not gotten any better, and would they consider not picking cotton in Roten, but skipping it and moving somewhere else. Sent all those letters in that typed envelope, a typed letter, and it wasn't like my mother just had to type. My mother was the only one that could type, okay? And it wasn't like she could type one letter and then they made copies of it. No, she had to type every letter individually, in every envelope individually. She did that. And she sent all those letters, and there was hardly any troqueros. And I admired in my later years, I've kind of admired the troqueros, because they were real entrepreneurs, Maybe they had a car that they could afford, or old car they could repair. But buying a truck, that was more expensive. Maintenance is more expensive, and more gasoline. Everything's more expensive. So I just really admire the troqueros that they had had the initiative and to look out for themselves and get as many people as they could to go up and pick the cotton. Well, the Anglo population is mostly Anglo. We were Hispanic. We were Mexican American. Less than 10% were really upset, and the little town had 4 cotton gins, and the second largest, biggest gin was the West Side Gin, it was a co-op that all the Martinezes belonged to it. So that gave it a good base. And the gentleman was one of those large stockholders. And the manager, Mr. Hancock, he was working with my uncles in this boycott thing that they were putting on. So I remember one Saturday morning, my mother dressed me like I was going to church. And my Uncle Bob came and picked me up. And we went to see Mr. Hancock. And while we were driving up there, Uncle Bob stopped, and he reached under the seat and said, "Son, I need to show you something." He pulled out a gun that was in the scabbard, a revolver in the scabbard. And he said, "Here, I want to show you this gun." He says, "If you need to shoot it," he said, "there's a red dot here. That's the safety. You need to move that safety, and then you can squeeze the trigger and fire it." Okay, he told me that, and he put it back. Oh, well, that was something that my Uncle Bob showing me that. I mean, it's just something that I accepted as something that just happened normally. I wasn't putting any particular special attention to a gun, that he had a gun under the car seat. I just took it as something normal that my uncles would be telling me, you know. Well, later on, I found out that the people were so upset that some men had been following my Uncle Bob, threatening him, and he just drove away and got away, and they thought that I was the oldest child. I was at the time about 12 years old, that if they had a child with him, it might bring a measure of safety, you know, or that people would not be so threatening. So that's what happened. That's how bad it was. And so that's when I went with my Uncle Bob, was having a meeting with Mr. Hancock. And right after that, I found out that Mr. Hancock would tell the business people or everybody in the town what the Martinez were demanding, okay? And so a bunch of business people quickly got together. There was a vacant building next to the post office that they turned into a restaurant, and Mexicans could go and be served in the restaurant. And okay, that's the first step. Second step is that there was a lady that had a beauty shop that hired one of the Galan girls. The Galan girls were pretty. I remember that as a little boy. And one of them had some expertise, and they started taking women in the beauty shop. So with those things change, you know, my uncle went around telling the people, hey, things have gotten better now. They say, you can, you know, come pick our cotton. It worked. My family, the Martinez family, did that far back in 1943.
That's extremely impressive. Was your family always so politically inclined?
Well, I remember the conversations because a lot of times my granddaddy had the biggest house. He built a new house and had the biggest house. And built a nice house in 1938 that had a basement, because most of our houses were small frame houses, and we always dug a hole in the ground, put a door on it. They used it for tornadoes when they come, because there were tornadoes in that area. When a tornado was coming, we'd go into that cellar. Okay, well, this house had a basement on it, and hardwood floors and nice, and so a lot of the times I remember so happy Sundays we would go to grandparents for lunch, and they served all the grandkids first, and then the men and the ladies next, and so and then we went out and played baseball or whatever, and so that was kind of a happy ritual, you know, Sunday dinner with the grandparents, and see, I lost my train of thought why I was telling you about that. The situation improved. Now, we in the Martinez family had never had experienced any overt racism, you know. You know, they served us in a restaurant, but they didn't come out and, you know, chat with us or whatever. Or so, but we were served, or we went to the theater, and the theater, the one that had stories on it, had Mexican balcony. Well, we ignored that. We just went downstairs. But they had another theater that was owned by the same man, and he even started showing Mexican movies. And so, to me, just things really improved. And you asked me about the Martinez, were they always politically inclined? I remember that triggered a question for me, that I remember hearing my uncles and my granddad, my dad, my uncles, and granddad, talking about current events. I remember first hearing about San Francisco Conference. Do you know what the San Francisco Conference was? That was in 1945.
It was the one after the Potsdam Conference, right?
Right. And it was where they formed the United Nations. And I thought about that later on, because listening to my grandparents and my aunts and uncles, my dad, they were talking about current issues. Okay? informed they were. And my grandfather, when they first got to Rotan, there was no church, and then they had a Catholic church that was in the barrio, which is very small, in the lower part of town. They had so very little rain in Rotan, but when it rained a lot, all the rain went right through to the barrio, and they flooded the barrio. So the Mexican Americans referred to the barrio as La Rana. You know what La Rana means?
The frog?
The frog, La Rana. And so my granddaddy was instrumental in contributing because he had pretty good money. He got the church rebuilt, built a brick church in the main part of town, a few blocks from where most of the other churches were. The First Baptist, the First Methodist, another church, a Christian, Church of Christ, the Church of Christ. Those were close together, and he built this one just about 2 blocks farther away from there, out of the Rana, built a Catholic church. I showed you all a picture of that brick church. It's still standing and still being used. And they built it in about 1940. So my grandparents were very active socially and really helping with the Hispanic community. There was a very poor couple, I guess the poorest couple in the barrio, Doña Demetria and Don Modesto, and they had several children. And sometimes on Sunday, my grandparents would send some of my uncles to town to pick them up on Sunday, bring them and have them come have lunch with them. And one thing that was funny is that when they left, my grandfather would give them a sack of beans or a sack of corn. And the joke was that my granddaddy said, "Well, Modesto, ¿qué quieres hoy? What do you want today? A sack of beans or a sack of corn?" He says, "Well, Mr. Martinez, how about one of each?" And so my granddaddy would always ask the question. My uncles tell us the story laughing because my granddaddy knew what the answer was going to be, So that's how socially involved the Martinez family was. Not just the grandparents, but all the uncles,
So that kind of makes me think of going back to the war. I'm sure it was a very sort of strenuous time. What sort of effect did it have on your family and kind of your family dynamic outside of work?
Oh, and this has nothing to do with being minority. We had to have ration cards for sugar, for shoes. If you wore out your shoes, you couldn't buy new shoes. Or if you couldn't repair them, you couldn't buy new. You had to have furnished a piece of paper that enabled you to go buy new shoes. And sugar was very restricted. And so had to husband it, had to use it very carefully because you did not get any more sugar until you got your next coupon. And that's why it was rough for everybody. And I remember one of my aunts saying that, that Jack Allen's was the name of the gas station where we dealt. Jack Allen was a great guy. And one of my aunts said, Jack Allen's was telling me how many times he was going to have to repatch my old tires on my aunt, that you couldn't buy new tires. Everything was rationed. And that was a strain on everybody,
Did you ever think about joining the war effort?
Not at my age. Because I was just, like 10 to 12 years old, 13, when I was that age.
When everyone had started to come back and after the war had ended, did your perception of war sort of change?
No, I don't think that that was kind of the top of my mind. Top of my mind was I lived in this environment that was so dry and so little vegetation, and that I wanted to live somewhere where I could have a place that I could go swimming in. We did go swimming in the stock tanks that we had, but I mean, you're just full of mud and the the cows and what couple of horses and mules would walk in the same stock tanks that we went swimming in, and I wanted to go swim in the swimming pool, you know, and so I wanted something more than what was available. I wasn't in love with the town. I was loyal to the town, really. I guess you could call it that way, loyal, but not crazy about it. That I wanted something else.
Is that what influenced you to, once you graduated high school, is that what influenced you to join up with the Army?
Yeah, joined the army because I knew about the GI Bill, you know, and and so I wanted to take advantage of the GI Bill. So I wanted to be a college professor. That's what I thought that I would want to be. One of my cousins, who was the same age as I am, pretty much, was the first student from Roten to go to Notre Dame. He took pre-med at Notre Dame, and then he graduated from med school in Galveston after that. And so he was the first. That's Martinez boy, you know. And so a lot of my cousins, I've got 3 nephews that went to Princeton, and another one, a girl, one of my nieces that went to Cornell, and then she graduated from Georgetown Law School. And then now she's in Houston and Austin, and she is with a large law firm that she is one of the top 50 women attorneys in the state of Texas. That's my niece.
And what was your college experience like?
Mine, hard, because when I first came to Austin, I had to work all night at the state hospital. It's a state hospital. That's kind of a misnomer, state hospital. That means the lunacy house, el manicomio. That's the only job I could get when I first came to Austin.
And what were you aiming for when you were at college? What major were you looking at?
Well, I told you that I wanted to be a college professor, but all the situations changed, and then when I got my degree, I thought what I really would want to be, and I thought I'd like to be a banker. And so I went over and talked to the president of Citibank, and he hired me. So I left the post office and went to work for Citibank. I was the first bank officer in the city of Austin. Bank officer. There were some. Okay. And then I was very active in creating the Hispanic Chamber in Austin in '73.
Since you mentioned it, what first got you, I know you mentioned Citibank, but what first got you into commerce specifically?
Well, I wanted something other than farming because as out of my dad had 8 brothers and 3 sisters, and so that means that he had 8 brothers. One of my uncles, Uncle Alec, was one of the younger ones that was in the war, and after the war he was in Rotan and farming for a couple of years, and then he left because he married a lady from New Hampshire, and he moved to New Hampshire. And my wife and I used to go see him every year for about 20 years until he died. And he told me one day, he says, "Son, when I got back from the Army, I told your granddad that this West Texas farming is a crapshoot. I want a monthly check. I want a check every month, payment." And so we hooked them for New Hampshire. And so, and I wanted something more like that instead of, I didn't think about that I would be running a great big farm or a great big dairy. Because the dairy is a tying down job. It ties you down 7 days a week, you know. What helped is that there were so many brothers that they could take turns and somebody could take off a few days, you know, and would be missed. And so, but I didn't want that kind of a life.
And how'd your family react when you went into commerce?
Oh, they were glad. They were encouraging. Oh, yeah, they were encouraging, yeah.
So why start specifically a chamber of commerce for Hispanics in Austin?
That's a good question, a real good question. I appreciate that. In those days, most of the businesses or commerce that was in Austin happened around Congress. Congress was the center of it and the surrounding area, downtown. And if you walk from 11th Street down Congress Avenue all the way to the river, and you walked in every one of those stores or businesses, you would be hard pressed to find a single Hispanic working in that store. If you saw somebody working, they were probably working in the back doing something else that didn't deal with waiting on the public. And so, when you went to the city for whatever kind of business or the county, you didn't see any Hispanics. And so the idea, I didn't come up with the idea of a Hispanic chamber. We had the war on poverty at that time in the early 60s. And I was appointed to that board. And there were about 3 guys that were working for the war on poverty. It was called the Human Opportunities Corporation. And they were the ones that suggested starting something to change the situation, and what they came up with was have a Mexican-American Chamber of Commerce. And I thought that was a great idea. I joined right away. But it was an advocacy group. That's what it was. And so we started working with somebody running for mayor, or somebody running for city council, or somebody running for county office. And they said, yeah, you know, we picked you, we'd like to support you, but you have to promise us that you're going to make every effort to hire Mexican Americans in your department. And it worked. When people wanted to get elected, you know, it worked. That worked. That's why we started the Mexican American Chamber of Commerce, and we did that for 3 or 4 years. I remember one time, because sometimes we met at a restaurant, at Little Matt's, or most of the time at one of the classrooms in St. Ed's. I'm a St. Ed graduate, you know, so a lot of our meetings happen at St. Ed's for the Hispanic Chamber, and we decided about, I think it was 3 years afterwards, that we're a chamber of commerce, and we should change our focus. And we started helping those few people that did actually have businesses, and we knew most of them that had Mexican Americans that had businesses, to support them, give them all the support we could, and then find out, let it be known that we were ready to help other people that wanted to go into business for themselves. That's what we used the chamber for. But at the same time that we changed our focus, we still had people on the board that followed the advocacy to promote improving the lot of Hispanics in Austin.
And so what was the process like starting the chamber?
What was the what?
The process like. How did it go about beginning?
Well, it was difficult. We had no money. Most of us were, short of experience. We had a board that hardly anybody wanted to serve in it. That's what it took. I was the third chairman of the board. And it took a lot of effort. And then with the war on poverty, Marta Cotera, who had been very active, just originally came, one and her husband, an architect, that came in the 1960 from El Paso. She was active, and so she wrote what an RFP requesting the city to fund the Mexican American Chamber of Commerce, and they did. So when we got funding, we got a telephone, and we got an office, a small office, and I still have the telephone number and that we had, the Mexican American Chamber of Commerce. And then years later, after we got more successful and better, changed it to the Hispanic, because there were some Cubans and Puerto Ricans and others that were in the community that we wanted to include them, and so we changed it to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And I think it's the premier civic organization or business organization in Austin. We have a lot of good Mexican American or Hispanic organizations that are excellent in what they do, and like Con Mi Madre or several of the others, but I think the Hispanic Chamber is the premier Hispanic organization in Austin.
Can you tell me about some of the other organizers?
Yeah, Gabe Gutierrez was an attorney, was local. Ramon Galindo, who was a tailor and had a very successful tailor business. He was one of the other members. Paul Tovar, who's a pharmacist. Those are some of the ones that I remember that were Juan Cotera, Marta Cotera, some of the Sonny Loredo, who still has a truss company. You know what a truss company is? Building trusses for houses and buildings, okay? So that's some of the other members that we had.
Can you tell me a bit about what the Chamber does right now?
Well, it's very active in sponsoring programs to take in people that want to start a business or people that have a business, how to improve it. They're very active in that. And also they have a leadership class teaching, several members that can join, that are members that can join that class. Teaching younger people about how to succeed in business, in civic work, because we have a lot of nonprofit organizations that a lot of Hispanics work in, and so it's still very active. It's very active in that. I attend some of those meetings.
And who was it that said you should start the Chamber?
Who was it that said we should start the Chamber? It was those three fellows that worked for the War on Poverty that suggested that. It wasn't my idea. I wish it had been my idea, but I grabbed to it when I first heard about it.
And do you remember who they were?
I remember their faces. Two of them, I don't remember their names. It's been too long. It's been almost 60 years.
And who were the first and second chairmen?
There was a fellow that had, the first one, I think his name was Jose Gonzalez. And I just really admired him. He was the first one that he had a Volkswagen repair business. And I think he was the first one. And I can't remember who the second one was, but I was the third one.
Mm-hmm. How would you say that the Chamber has changed over the years? I know you mentioned that you got funding, but overall, how would you say it's changed?
Well, it's a real chamber of commerce. And instead of being just an advocacy group, it's still advocacy in a way, but many of the people that have worked in positions in the chamber has enabled them to get positions elsewhere in the community. And not only that, I remember we had one that went to Tom Warner from running the chamber to Tom Warner. This is one of them that comes to my mind right away. Several others were very successful. Some were successful, they left town. Enabled them to do that.
And then, so what's your current, I know you mentioned that you're mainly retired when we were doing the pre-interview, but what's your main role, or what are some of your duties with the current form of the chamber?
With the current chamber, being active with the leadership group, because I've talked to them. We as Hispanics, I think by design, have been denied knowing about our background from Spain. I think that was done by design. And if you ask some people, what is the first city in the United States? What's the only city in the United States? I don't know. It's St. Augustine, Florida. What is the second one? You don't know. They don't know. So many people act as though we Hispanics don't belong, that we all just came here as migrants lately. Well, I was telling somebody here on the staff that, I can trace back my family coming to the United States in 1790 that was about my sixth great grandfather. There was the tax collector for El Paso. And if you start looking at the names of the states, you start with Florida, Spanish name, land of flowers. Texas, named after the Texas Indians. New Mexico, you don't have to explain that one. New Mexico, Arizona, what it means, arid land in Spanish. Nevada, what does it mean? Snowy land, Montana, the mountain state. Colorado, the red state, and there's a story about why the Spanish soldiers named it Colorado, because the river, when it exited the Rockies, it was a lot of red clay, and the color of the water was reddish, so they named it the Colorado, the red state. Then how was California named? Well, in 1510, a Spanish writer wrote a story about a heroine named California, and Spanish sailors sailing the coast named it California. That's how that's where the name came from. The most interesting one is Oregon Territory. How did it have a Spanish name? Well, the Spanish soldiers noticed that in this area of what is now Oregon, that the Indians had very big ears. And Orejon, it's just spelled like Oregon, except they changed the G to a J. It's Orejon. It's the big ears. They named those the Orejones. So that's the Spain did all that. Okay, the Spanish government was at first, so they would get into a war with England, was very careful about providing the Continental Congress with support, the Continental Army with support. We don't know that the Spanish government had real money. It wasn't printed money, it was Spanish pesos that they paid the French fleet 25 million pesos to bring the French fleet up the Gulf Coast so that the English couldn't come up the Gulf Coast up the Mississippi and come in behind George Washington. We don't know any of those things. All this about the states, all this that we've been denied, and this is what I teach those people in the leadership class. all the downtown streets in original Austin, what are they named at? All the rivers in Texas. Did you know that? See, all the you know the Rio Grande, the Nueces, the San Antonio, the Brazos, the Colorado, all of those are Spanish names that the downtown Austin had named after the rivers. They're all named in Spanish, and so you don't hear that in school, and that needs to be changed. And somebody's working on that now.
Well, I hate to skip back, but I want to go back to something I covered. You mentioned the commerce, and I wanted to get into that. But your brother has quite the notoriety, mainly around the University Tower shooting. Can you tell me about that day for you? What it was like hearing all the news and what your brother had done?
I have a lot of admiration for my brother, and that day, it was a Monday, and I worked for the post office, and I was supervisor of the post office, but my tour didn't start till late in the afternoon. And when the shooting happened, and I was sitting there taking it all in, I had a call from my brother. He said, the chief told me that he doesn't want me to go home. He doesn't want me to talk to the media. And so I want to come over to your house. I said, come on over. So he came over to my house, sat down on the couch, and he told me all about it. All the shooting, how it had happened, and everything. And it goes back to the question that you asked me about how did I feel when I was growing up, and different or what? Well, I never felt so different as when I came to Austin and encountered made to feel different, that I didn't belong in Austin. It wasn't in West Texas where I was raised. I felt I belonged over there or something. Working the land, working with cattle, and all that, and I felt like I belonged, And my grandfather was so respected. There was a great article in the newspaper when my grandfather died that even the Bishop of Amarillo, Bishop Fitzsimmons, came and said the mass for my granddaddy when he died. Excuse me, but I get a little emotional. That's how well respected my grandfather was. And about my brother, getting back to my brother, he told me all that he did, that he was at home and fixing a little steak because his tour didn't start until 2 o'clock that day, and it was at noon. And he saw that on the news. He watched the news at noon, and he said, hey, yeah, they told him, put on your uniform, come on, and direct traffic. So I put on my uniform, and I got out there, all the streets were covered. So I started to go to where the shooting was coming from. It said, like, you have a fire. The fireman goes to where they see the smoke, and they see the things burning. So I walked to the front, and I came by where Billy Speed had just gotten shot and taken away, and he ran across the mall in the open area, zigzagging like he'd been taught in the Army, and a reporter got hit right next to him. Well, window next to him, he went to the left side of the building where he knew he could have an entrance. He got there and he got to the elevators, and he got up to the 26th floor, and he found a DPS man with a rifle and a sidearm. His name was Cowan. I forgot his first name now. And a city policeman named Jerry, forgot his name now. I think Jerry Day. And he thought there would be a group of city policemen already up there, going to storm the tower. That's all there was. And so he moved some of the people that had been wounded out of the way, and so then there was this gentleman that he had one of those little plastic things where you put, your pen and so forth. He assumed that he was a plainclothes policeman, and so he met him, and he started. My brother Ramiro started walking up the steps to go up to where we could tell that there was a shooter or shooters. Didn't know how many there were. And this gentleman said, "You're not going by yourself. I'm going with you." I said, "Well, come on then." And so we'll just do it, Hollywood style. While I'm aiming up there, I'll cover you. You run up, and then you get a position, and then you cover me while I run up. That's how they run up the step and turn all those corners to get up there. And the civilian didn't have a weapon. The DPS man gave him his rifle. Instead of the DPS man and the other policeman going up with him, and my brother kind of taken over. He told Jerry Day to take this wounded man and take him out of there, take him down, because he wanted to take their gun away so he could go up there and shoot the shooter. And so that's how my brother and for the moment I forgot his name. His name, the civilian, that he was the manager of the co-op across the street, UT Co-op. So they got up there to the 20, I guess it's the 27th floor, and saw these people wounded, and there was two young men. One of them was dead, and the other, and he told me what it looked like, and I won't go into that, and it's too gruesome. And his brother, and he couldn't talk, but he was telling me he was up there. So he moved them, and then came across the lady that had been at the reception desk, moved her out. She was okay. And so then they decided to open the door, knock the door down, or knock the door open to get out into the walkway where they knew that the shooter was. They could hear him firing over there. And the civilian said, "Are we doing this for real?" And Ramiro's classic answer, "You're damn right. Why?" He said, "Well, then you better deputize me because I'm a civilian." And he took the rifle of the guy from DPS guy, but the guy from DPS from the state should have been the one that was in charge, leading the charge or putting things together or taking it. No, it was Ramiro that was doing all the initiative, everything that needed to be done. And so all right. So the sniper had a dolly to carry all the stuff up there, and he took the metal dolly and propped it up against the door. And my brother had to kick the door several times until it knocked the dolly off, and the dolly clattered down, and so he knew that everybody that was out there heard him. And so he stuck his head out, not knowing. Somebody who talked to said to look, and they didn't see anybody. I said, "Okay, let's go." He says, "I'm going to go this way, and you go right here, and if somebody comes around that corner, you shoot him." So my brother went the other way.
Okay, so you were telling me that your brother had just gotten to the top of the tower and kicked in the door?
Yes, and then what's his name? McCoy came behind him with a shotgun. And he said, oh, that looked like the most beautiful shotgun because that's really good for that. And so he was walking straight. My brother kept telling him to get down because they were firing from down there. And so they got to the corner, and so then they couldn't see him yet because there's the corner, and you go, I measured it about, 8 or 10 feet, and then there's the things that are there that hold up the clock, and that was blocking him seeing the shooter in the corner. So they walked over there, and McCoy was behind him, and so when he saw him, he started firing at him, and Ramiro says that the civilian, Alan Crum, when he went over there, he was unfamiliar with the rifle, and he fired a shot into the wall, and the sniper heard him over there. So he said the sniper heard that shot, and he was with his rifle pointing that way towards where the civilian was. And so he said, I started squeezing my rounds, and I noticed I hit him with the first one, and then another one that hit the carbine, and you can tell that how it split the wood on the carbine and hit him. And I emptied my gun. I kept screaming at McCoy to fire. I never heard him fire. And he says, this is what he told me sitting next to me. He said, I don't know if he froze or if he fired a shot at the same time I fired, and that's why I didn't hear him. And so I just grabbed the shotgun from McCoy and ran and fired at him. And that ended it. Ramiro says, if you said all the ifs, that if Alan had not fired that shot into the wall, and the sniper was pointing his rifle that way, and he would have been, if the sniper had been facing from where my brother was coming, he might not have made it, my brother. So he said, and so there were other people that came from McCoy, and they were down there, and one of them that always kept lying and saying that no, that it was McCoy, that was he shot. No. That guy, I have him on his report to the city. I forgot his name right now. He died now recently during the COVID. He said, we were walking up the stairs, 3 cops. We're walking up the steps, and when we heard all the shooting, we ran back down. That's what he says. We ran back down. Oh, this guy that's saying that McCoy did it, that Martinez didn't do anything, that all these shots missed, and all those business. That guy, I had it written. If you go to the Austin History Center and you get that guy's name, I can tell you his name, and you see his report, it says that they ran back down here, real brave, Instead of, let's go help them, they ran away. And then, I have the report that for that year from the city manager, in which the chief of police, Miles, says that at some such time, he says, he quotes the officer that called, that said, Martinez got him. Martinez got him. That was in August. In December, when the report came out, that's the report. It's verifying that Martinez got him. Well, years later, the civilian moved from here to Las Vegas, and he wasn't around. He was the only Anglo one. And so Miles and all these people started saying that no, that the sniper died from the shotgun pellets. Well, we know from all the shots that McCoy fired 1 shot, and Ramiro fired another shot, and those are pellets. And those pellets don't have their names on them. And how can they say that it was the pellets that came from the firing that McCoy did that killed him? They go to such lengths to try to put down Ramiro. when they don't talk, all the officers down there, captains and lieutenants, and not one of them thought to go up there what Ramiro did. He got there and he got up there and he took over and he showed the initiative and the courage and everything, turning all those corners, being the first policeman, first white man, first man to turn all those corners to face the shooter. So this is the type of situation that we had endured in Austin in those days.
How did your perception of him change that day?
I really don't know. Knowing him all these years, I always thought he was real cool, and easy when you're talking to him, that he can make you laugh. He can say something clever. He's never been uppity or, demanding, or he's been more understanding. He's a great man.
I wanted to go back just because he seems very important to you, and you mentioned him very early on. Is there anything else you'd want to share about your grandfather?
Well, I think I told you about that he put an ad in the La Prensa for a tutor, so he could have somebody to teach his children when there was no school even for Anglos in those days. That's one thing. The other thing is that he was so active that he did well and that he helped the minorities. He really helped the Hispanic community by building their church and contributing and taking care of them, being always helpful when somebody needed some help. That was my grandfather. Something to be really proud of.
I know you mentioned when you'd fix stuff with him. Do you have a certain memory of him that you hold to you?
Yeah, one time we were fixing a gate, and we'll keep the chickens in, and this is when the first time that I heard him say, mijo, que es su abuelo tan pendejo. Another thing that he said that was really funny. My mother had bought me, and my dad, in World War II, they bought me, this was when I was about 7 years old, a little sailor suit. I was wearing my sailor suit, and it's called, a sailor suit in Spanish is called marinero. Marinero means sailor. Marinero. And he said to me in Spanish, que chulo se ve mi hijo con su traje de marranero. No, abuelito, no es marranero, es marinero. See, he mispronounced the word marinero as meaning a pig carrier, somebody takes care of pigs, marranero. No, abuelito, no, and he laughed, no es marranero, es marinero. He was, I think my brother Ramiro has a lot of that. My granddaddy.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. I think, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I wanted to mention that. I wanted to mention that the Martinez carried that strike on that was successful. That bishop from Amarillo came to celebrate the Mass from my granddaddy. That's how. That's the background that I have, that I come from. I think when I look back at what I learned from my grandfather, my grandparents, and my uncles, that they gave me a sense of noblesse oblige. That I have I want to express it this way, that I have a responsibility to be respectful and to be helpful.
Perfect. All right. In that case, thank you so much for allowing us to interview you today. It's been wonderful. If you'd like, once we finalize everything, we can send you a copy of both the transcript and a recording of today's interview.
Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Oh, sorry.
Anything else?
One more thing. I know you mentioned being in the Army just for a bit. Do you mind just retelling us that story of that you told the professor and I about boot camp? The Civil War.
Oh, the Civil War?
Yeah, do you mind just retelling?
Well, I was fresh out of high school, and I was probably with about 5 companies, around 1,000 men, going to taking the training, basic training. And the basic training was about military history, and this lieutenant says, does anybody know when the Civil War took place? Nobody knew. So I raised my little hand and said, yes, sir. I said, it started when the Confederates fired on Fort Sumter in 1961, and it ended when General Lee surrendered to General Grant in Appomattox Courthouse. It's Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia in 1965. And he said, you are the only second person that has known the answer to this whole training cycle. So I was pretty proud of myself, you know.
And what was the rest of your time in the military like?
It was very good. It was pleasant because I was a company clerk in a headquarters company. And to me, it was an enjoyable job. And because I got to be with in a headquarters company with all the soldiers that were running personnel, that were running intelligence, that were running all of the support services for the battalion. I was with those people. Most of them were college graduates or had been to college, and I was just fresh out of high school, you know, and I got along real well with them, and I learned a lot from them, and it was very pleasant.
Got it. And then I think that should be everything. All right. Again, thank you so much for allowing us to interview you today. If you'd like, once we finalize everything, we'll send you a copy of both the transcript and the audio recording. Thank you so much.
Are we all?